I am the Ascended Master Gautama Buddha. What can I offer you in terms of healing? Well, given the magnificent teachings that have been given by other masters, I had to reach deep into my being to see what I might contribute that hasn't been said by the others, but that could still be useful to human beings on earth at this particular time. For as I have said before, every dictation is a unique event. The interdependent originations that are formed here on earth at this very moment will never be repeated. Never, ever. And perhaps this is one contribution I could make. For what does it mean that everything has or is part of this web of the interdependent originations? Well, it means, for one thing, that nothing is separate. Regardless of appearances that are seen as real from the separate mind, nothing is separate. What does that mean? It means that the illusion that you are a separate being who can co-create whatever you want independently of the whole of the Christ mind of other beings, that illusion is completely unrealistic. Everything is interconnected. No man is an island. But how come then that Padmasambhava just said that beings are allowed to go into the separate mind? Well, he didn't say they were allowed to go into separation. They were allowed to go into the illusion of separation. Meaning what? Meaning separation can never be a reality. Only the experience of separation can actually happen. But it can only happen in the mind of an individual being or a group of beings. It exists only in the mind, and it can be repeated only in the mind. You can build a sophisticated civilization based on the illusion of separation. You can come to believe that it is so sophisticated, so powerful, that it must last forever, or at least for 1,000 years. But it is just a mirage, an image projected onto the matter light. And the moment the self-aware beings who projected it become self-aware as being extensions of the one mind, at that moment, it will disappear. You are thinking, experiencing. You have a physical body that has some continuity. The body has developed some disease. It has some continuity. Perhaps it is chronic, as they say, incurable. But how could it be incurable or chronic when it is just an image projected onto the matter light? What does it really mean, the interdependent originations? It means that your body is not separated from your mind, and your mind is not separated from the Christ mind. You are not separated from your I am presence. You are not separated from the ascended masters. Everything is interdependent, which means you can go into the illusion that you are a separate being who has a separate physical body that has contracted a certain disease. You can go into the illusion that from this perspective of being a separate being, you cannot heal that disease. Or you can only do it with physical measures. But the reality is that you are interconnected with the whole, including the ascended masters. We have given you these images that there is the physical realm, there's the emotional, mental, and identity realms. And then beyond that is the spiritual. And the linear mind can conceive of this as, here's a level of vibrations, that's the physical, then it goes up, and beyond this level is the spiritual realm. But that's not interdependent originations. Even the idea, a valid idea at a certain level, that your four lower bodies are a projection of a blueprint in the identity level, or from your I am presence, is not entirely correct because it is so linear. It gives you easily the impression that the matter world is separated from spirit. But how could the matter world exist if it was separated from spirit? How could the movie be experienced if there was no movie screen? So you cannot be separated from the power of the ascended masters, which means that if you switch your mind, that power can instantly come into your four lower bodies and dispel the lack of information that manifested a disease. This is simply reality. The idea of separation, the idea that some disease could be incurable, unchangeable, is unreality. It is not information, it is outformation. the interdependent originations is something that the linear mind cannot fathom. Many Buddhists, even Buddhist scholars, throughout the ages have contemplated it with a linear mind, as they contemplated most of the other things I said with a linear mind. They have not grasped it. Neither have grasped the concept of non-self, because it cannot be grasped with a linear mind. But it can be grasped or experienced intuitively when the conscious you steps outside of the four lower bodies, outside of that linear mind, and you go back into this state where you're open to discovering rather than defining how the world works. You are acknowledging, I am a co-creator. I can co-create something based on separation, but whatever I co-create will break down, and that is why my body has manifested disease. But I am really, when I go into separation, decreating instead of co-creating. But when I bring myself back in formation with the one mind and acknowledge that I am part of the interdependent originations, then I can accept that the power of spirit can flow into my four lower bodies. And what does the power of spirit do? Does the power of spirit heal your physical body? Nay. The light simply dispels the darkness so that Christ information replaces the non-information, the non-formation, the outformation, the deformation of your physical body, replacing it with the information from the Christ mind. It is the old analogy, you cannot remove darkness from a room. You need to bring the light, and the darkness disappears because it had no substance, no reality. It was an absence of light, but it wasn't even an absence. It was the seeming absence created in a mind that was out of formation with a one mind. That is why Mother Mary has stressed several times the importance of accepting healing, accepting a new identity as a whole being, as a healed being, as a healthy being. Switching the mind from separation to oneness, from seeming independence to interdependence. You are allowed to create the impression that you are independent and you of your own self can do something. You're allowed to have that experience for as long as you want. But in order to give you the opportunity to come back from that illusion, to avoid being trapped in that illusion, you become subject to the second law of thermodynamics that break down whatever you decreate, so that you cannot maintain it and therefore have an opportunity to evaluate. Do I want to stay out of formation or do I want to come back into formation? Now, the fallen beings, those who think they're the cleverest, they would, if they were to hear this, which they will never do, They would argue. But by bringing your free will into formation with a Christ mind, you are submitting to a foreign will, to a will external to yourself. You are becoming a robot, a marionette that just follows along like the lemmings running towards the sea. It is only we who have rebelled against the Creator's will and the one mind. It is only we who have attained truly free will. For we are free to define how reality should be. This they will claim with great conviction, with great vigor, with great force. Does a separate being, a being that thinks it's separate, has it actually gained free will? Has it gained a will that is entirely free? Well, when the Creator decided to create this world of form, it of course had experience based on other worlds of form. There is, as the saying goes, nothing new under the sun. And there's really nothing new in the allness in terms of certain overall principles. So, self-awareness gives rise to free will, where you can choose anything you can imagine. But you must start out with a limited sense of self, limited imagination, and your will cannot be more free than your imagination. It is impossible. You cannot create something that you cannot imagine. You may technically have the free will to create anything you want, but you cannot want something you cannot imagine. So therefore, you cannot create it. And so, the more limited your imagination is, the less free your will is. So the Creator knew that by giving self-aware beings free will, there was a certain risk involved. Now, of course, the entire purpose of creation is to give self-aware beings free will so they can grow in self-awareness. But there is that risk involved. And what is the risk? The risk is, as a co-creator, you are co-creating something but as long as you are connected to the Christ mind, you experience, this is not something you know theoretically, you experience that you have not become your own creation. Ponder that very carefully, because the risk built into free will is that you can co-create something and you come to identify yourself with it. So you think you are limited by your own creation. You think that even though you have created these conditions, you cannot uncreate them. You are trapped in them. You don't think you are trapped. You just identify with them. And you think this is all you can be. Now, when you co-create with some connection to the Christ mind, you cannot fall prey to this illusion. But the moment you go into the separate illusion, the illusion of separation, you can fall prey to this illusion. And the more you use the dualistic mind, to create something that seems very sophisticated and elaborate. The more you use force to create this, the more identified you will become with your own creation. And here I'm not only talking about creating, for example, a sophisticated civilization on a planet. I'm really talking about the subconscious selves you create in your own mind. We have talked about fallen beings many times. What is a fallen being? In a previous dispensation, we used the concept of fallen angels. And the idea was that there was this being that existed in a higher realm, and it fell in rebellion against God. So the popular image at the time was the soul fell. This was what could be given at the time, but it's not the highest understanding. You may take our teachings that you are not the soul, you're not the four lower bodies, you're the conscious you. So, take a fallen being. The fallen being still has a conscious you. Did the conscious you fall? Is the conscious you the fallen being? Nay. The conscious you is still the conscious you. It's just not conscious of itself. Instead, the conscious you has created subconscious selves based on separation. And it's come to identify itself with them. It has come to identify itself as them. These subconscious selves fell. The conscious you hasn't fallen. The conscious you is not a fallen being. A fallen being is a conglomerate of subconscious selves that has formed a certain identity that seems very sophisticated and powerful. But in the core of all these separate selves is still the being that descended from heaven, the conscious you, which isn't sophisticated, isn't this self or that self, it's pure awareness. What has happened to a fallen being is that the conscious you has come to identify itself with and as its own creation. This, my beloved, is not sophisticated. It is highly unsophisticated. A new co-creator who has a very limited sense of self is more sophisticated than a fallen being because it has a sense that it is connected to something outside its own mind. The fallen being has lost that sense of connection and believes that it is only its own mind. So what about the claim that only when you rebel against God or oneness or the Christ do you gain free will? How free is the will of a fallen being? When you, the conscious you, identifies itself with its own creation, how can you even imagine something beyond what you have created? Which means, how can you imagine something beyond what you imagined in the past? Free will means that you have the ability to imagine something you have never imagined before. And when you imagine it, you can choose it. But if you have become identified with your own creation, the subconscious selves, the conscious you of that being cannot imagine something beyond the selves. That means you cannot choose anything that the selves cannot imagine. And if they are based on separation, They can only imagine things that fall within separation. They cannot imagine something beyond separation. How is that free will? The fallen being has not attained free will. It has lost free will because it has lost free imagination. Now, you can always say that a new co-creator doesn't have unlimited imagination because it can only imagine based on its current sense of self and sense of the environment it's in. But because it has a sense of connection to the one mind, it has this sense that there is more to my current state of mind. There's more than my current environment. There's something more. What is the Christ mind? It connects the creator and the creation, which means that when you have the slightest connection to the Christ mind, you know that there's more. And if you continue to follow that more, you actually end up at the creator. Now, who has the greatest free will in your world of form? The creator. A fallen being does not have free will at all because there's no room for imagination. A fallen being is not trying to imagine something beyond its current sense of self. It is seeking to reinforce, validate, and sustain its current sense of self. It is not seeking to transcend itself, but to defend itself, its sense of self. That leaves very little room for imagination. That is transcending your current level of imagination. How is that freedom of imagination? How is it freedom of choice? You cannot choose a choice you cannot conceive of. You co-create by using the conceptual mind to formulate an image. But if you're in the fallen consciousness, there are some very, very restrictive limitations on what images you can formulate. Because you can't transcend the past, you can only build onto the past. You could say, as a fallen being, you can imagine building a car. You can imagine building a more sophisticated car, a faster car, a more powerful car. And you can keep building on to this fantastic car. But you cannot imagine that perhaps you can create a machine that could fly. Because you're only thinking within certain parameters. In my mind, that is not freedom of will. How do you ascend? When you come to see this, you see that separation limits your will, and that by bringing yourself, your conscious you, into formation with the one mind, you actually gain true freedom of will. Because now your imagination is unlimited. Instead of imagining within the parameters set by your previous choices, you can imagine going beyond those choices, those selves you have created. So, I may not be quite as practical of a master as Mother Mary, who is more in tune with the physical octave, whereas me, holding the office of the Buddha and the Lord of the world, tend to look more from the overall perspective. So I realize, as does Padmasambhava, that we have come from a more esoteric viewpoint than Mother Mary has done. Yet, is it not practical to free your mind from the constraints that prevent you from imagining something beyond your current state? For if you cannot imagine something, you cannot manifest it. If you cannot imagine a healthy body, how can you come to accept it? So is it not practical to realize that a diseased body is a product of the separate mind? And when you bring your mind into formation with the one mind, then the principle of the interdependent originations means that it becomes possible for the power of spirit to transform any physical condition. And those of you who are ready to grasp this can then take that step towards accepting, I am a healthy body. You can even go beyond it, where there is not even the concepts of illness and health. There's just the body in alignment with the highest blueprint in your identity body. A blueprint that is free from the subconscious selves, free from your genetic inheritance, and therefore is a healthy body. So with this, I will seal this conference in a flame of peace that I hold for Earth. In a way, you could say that what we have attempted to do with this conference is to bring you out of the state of mind that many people go in when they come to accept that their body is ill, a state of unpeace. Now, what was it that manifested the disease in the first place? Yes, it was a state of unpeace. Because when you go into separation, you automatically go into unpeace. For you are using force against others. How can that lead to peace? So the disease was manifest by a state of unpeace. Now you realize you have a disease and your body will give you pain or might die. So you go into a more intense state of unpeace. How will that heal the body exactly? How can more of that which created the illness heal the illness? But of course, the real consequence of being in a state of unpeace is that you cannot accept healing. So we have attempted to give you various teachings and tools that, if you apply them, can lead you to a state of peace. Regardless of the physical condition, you can be in a state of peace. And if you can attain that peace, then it becomes much more feasible, realistic for you to accept healing, even instantaneous healing. So, as I said in the beginning, the interdependent originations on earth and in the spiritual realm are completely unique in this moment. Never, ever in the entire history of the world of form have conditions been exactly as they are at this moment. I appreciate this uniqueness. I appreciate interacting with you. You may think that so many things on earth have repeated themselves so many times over such a long period of time. You may come to think or believe in the old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. But I see that everything is new. How can you be healed? You cannot be healed. Your body cannot be healed. Your sense of self cannot be healed. But your sense of self can become new, can become reborn in Christ by letting the old sense of self die. And thereby your body can become new in Christ when you let your old image of the body die. That which is out of the death consciousness cannot inherit eternal life. So what is the way to conquer death? To let the separate self die, so that you, the conscious you, are reborn into a higher awareness of yourself. Is that not what all of our teachings have been aimed at from the beginning? To help you become a new being in Christ. So be sealed in the flame of peace, in which everything is new.